So my name's Roger, and this is One Table, Two Mics, so it's about why I think interviewing is the best way to do podcasts or Google Hangouts, whatever you're into now. I just was in Evo's Google Hangouts thing, and the last two kind of interviews I did was over Google Hangouts. So I absolutely, this is an platform agnostic presentation. I had a presentation together. Apparently they're having technical difficulties, so it's just going to be me today. So a little bit about me. I run my own marketing agency, pretty small company focus at this point, and I've been doing that for about 3 or 4 years now. And before that, I worked in telecom. I worked at GoDaddy for a little bit, and always in sales, on the sales side of things, but I've always kind of had a knack for doing websites and all this type of stuff. And recently, I decided to start doing a podcast on my website, desertstandard.com, which has been around for a while, but I've never really focused anything on it. And I started off doing the podcast, and it was just me. I was like, oh, I'll pick a topic and I'll talk about it. And I've done some video blogs along those lines, because that's a service I do for my clients. So I'm like, I'm doing this for my clients. I should at least be doing this personally and just honing my skills. And so I did a couple of podcasts where it was just me talking about a topic, and I didn't even want to listen to that crap. I mean, and so I can almost guarantee that, and from looking at the numbers, like, they're the lowest listened to shows that I've got. Then I started doing interviews, mainly because I had a Zoom H4n recorder, which has 2 XLR inputs, and then I got some cheap Sennheiser $30 mics, and it sounds really good. And so, if you want to go the route of doing a podcast, I highly recommend doing something like that that's a portable recorder, and then you can just go anywhere and interview people. And then now I'm recommending, considering Google Hangouts, just because now you can just be like, hey, can you just be available for 30 minutes at your computer someday, and so it just simplifies that process. But since I started doing interviews, the show numbers haven't gotten crazy. I think the highest listened to show right now is like 55 downloads or views or whatever. So still, I mean, there's nothing to shout out, and I don't want to put myself out as a highly successful expert interviewer or anything like that. I want to just share some of the pitfalls and successes that I've found with doing this, and then open it up. Give me questions, feedback. If you have suggestions that are better, please feel free to share them. So when I decided, the interview is the most, is just the best format, I think, for doing any of these types of shows for a few reasons. The podcast, I noticed the podcasts that I listen to are almost all interviews now. There have been some that I listened to in the past where it was just one person, but it's just not engaging, especially if it's an audio-only situation. So the top ones that I listen to now, and people that I think are really good interviewers, WTF with Mark Maron. He's arguably one of the best interviewers, I think, in media right now. And it shows. I mean, the people he's getting on, he had Mel Brooks, he's had some huge names on recently that you have to think, well, people are seeing that as a marketing play. So he gets a lot of listeners. If you do listen to him, I suggest fast forwarding the first 10 minutes of the show, because it's his monologue, and I just can't stand it. And his is really navel-gazing stuff, but his interviews are great. And the reason I think they're great is he really takes an interest and really wants to get to know the person he's talking to, and he doesn't necessarily provoke uncomfortable situations like a Joe Rogan or Adam Carolla might, but he gets the interviewer comfortable enough where they just start talking about childhood stuff, where it's like, well, that's pretty impressive that this person's open to talking this way. And to me, it makes a show just so much more engrossing. I really like biographies, whether it's on the Biography channel or reading them, because there's this inner thing with all people where we're measuring ourselves against everybody around us. We're not supposed to, right? But we do. I mean, it's just natural, because you're like, well, am I doing good? Okay, well, what's this other person? How are they doing? Am I above or better or worse than them? And I think with an interview, you don't need to make it into a situation where you're trying to measure yourself with somebody else, but you're gauging, you're at least seeing, okay, well, they did all of these things, and it's what's led them to where they're at. Maybe I can emulate something like that or whatever. I mean, there's just more curiosity, I think, with an interview. And so then it goes into the psychology of all this stuff. And so coming from a sales background, I think that the hardest part of doing an interview, and it happens to me all the time in the middle of them, is listening. And I'll find as the interviewer that the person's talking, but I'm not necessarily listening to them. I'm thinking about the next thing I want to ask them. And that's a pitfall whether you're doing a podcast interview or you're interviewing for a job or you're trying to do a sales presentation. You need to make sure that you're listening to the person that you're interviewing. And the better you do that, the less structured your interview needs to be. This idea that you sit down with a list of questions is a good idea. You should have some central subject that you want a show to be about. And like with Desert Standard, what I wanted to do was highlight what's happening in Phoenix. So I interview people who live in Phoenix, who are doing something that I think is interesting. And then further, they're not necessarily getting a lot of publication. People are always suggesting, well, why don't you interview so-and-so and so-and-so? And I'm like, they're already in the news, or they're getting coverage. I'd rather find the stories and find the people that, we're not all hearing about. So that's on the high level, kind of where Desert Standard's coming from. So I recommend you go out and you at least get kind of a general basis of your show. Mark Maron does that with WTF. It's just about how neurotic and psycho Mark Maron is, and, getting that out of other people, I guess. Getting Doug with high is another great example. Doug Benson just likes to smoke a lot of marijuana, so he invites people onto his show, and that's what they do. And it's hilarious. And then you don't have to be as risque. There's probably more child-appropriate themes. But then, it's really finding somebody that you're interested in, too. Like there's a lot of people in Phoenix, obviously, that I could interview. But it's not necessarily going to be a good interview unless I'm really interested, at least curious about who they are and what they're doing. So I try and work that in, and then I try and do a little bit of research on them just to make sure, I have some place to start with talking to them. And usually it's a business owner, so we'll talk about their business. Or they might be putting on an event, so we'll talk about the event. After that, it's just learning to become a good interviewer. I'm not going to try and get into that today. I don't think I'm really the greatest interviewer, but I think the listening thing's good. Having some sort of structure to your interview is good. And then from there, it just kind of goes with where, they're going to say stuff that you're going to be able to react to and just take the interview that way. And the only way to get good with that is just do them in practice. What's the funner side, so that's kind of the practical side of it. The logistical side of interviews is probably the toughest thing. Getting somebody to confirm a time and show up for that time is definitely, there's a reason that I haven't had one on like 3 weeks now. I was doing a weekly podcast, but I got busy, and then I've just had cancellations, and it happens. People have other things that come up and they need to do, and what have you. So, coming up with some sort of a system for scheduling out is really good. I had that for like 4 shows. I had them scheduled out 4 weeks in a row, and that just makes it super easy. Or I did 3 podcasts back to back 1 week, and then I just scheduled those out over 3 weeks. So, trying to figure that out is arguably one of the toughest things, because if you're not posting content regularly, people will stop listening to your show. It's pretty simple. So I don't know. There's probably a lot more I could talk about. I talked about that's 12 minutes straight. Jesus. Any questions? Any comments?
Well, your last point, as far as I can say from my own personal perspective, one of the things that pisses me off the most when I find a podcast I like is when there's 4 episodes on a schedule and then they're gone for 3 months. Then they come back and do 1 episode, and I just stop listening to them.
Sure.
What is your thoughts or experience with that frequency? I know obviously you had some scheduling challenges and stuff, but do you find there's sort of a sweet spot, if you will, for frequency?
You know, I listen to, I think if you really want to have a show that people are going to listen to and they're going to take something from, I think you have to do a weekly show.
Right. That's kind of where I was.
Speaking from my experience, right? I mean, I've got so many things on Downcast on my phone right now. And I've just really been into just listening to comedy shows lately. And the guys that are on weekly, they get listened to. I mean, they're on the queue.
Right.
And, you know, I don't have a lot of time to listen to podcasts. They are playing generally in the background throughout the day, but, you know, a lot of them are longer form, so they're an hour long. 2 or 3 podcasts in a day, and I'm done. So, you know, if you're not posting regularly, you're not going to be in the top of those queues. Then it's the question of, you know, how serious are you about this? What's the point of it? And what's your niche? The more niche you get, right? So if you've got a business, and this is what I'm kind of developing on now. I don't have any clients right now that do podcasting, but I've got a number that we do video blogs for. And so we do super short form, 2 to 3 minutes. Really, it's an FAQ format type of thing. And you're not necessarily looking to build an audience with those. You're just trying to supply information. So I think on a podcast side, you know, it's got to be a little bit longer form. And you've got to plan it out. It's the same thing with your blog posts. You know, you want to try and do, you know, 1 or 2 days out of the month where you write most of your blog posts, and then you can go and do your regular stuff the rest of the month. So,
do you ever repurpose, because we've done some video blogs and stuff too, and my thought was, do we do that? You know, that content would almost work as an audio podcast as well. Do you ever repurpose the audio from the video blogs into a podcast?
Yet. Once again, I don't have any. So podcasting is really, it's had kind of a resurgence in the last few years, it seems. But it seems like it's gone more the entertainment resurgence, right? Whereas YouTube, you know, and this whole conversation is gonna be taken over by YouTube just like everything else. The stats are coming out. The most watched videos on YouTube is not a surprise, comedy. The second most watched type of video are DIY and how-to videos.
Yep.
And, you know, so it's interesting. So where does podcast kind of fit in with that? And I think that's the interview is where podcasts really, I think, can focus and shine.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Good question, so.
Have you ever done, and I consider this with at least a couple of situations, I would say, but done podcasts as means of marketing? More like what a radio does for weekend sales, where your client buys your podcast, or in essence, it becomes their podcast that you run it for.
Sure.
So in other words, you would have, you know, you still have the issue with weekly form, weekly versus, you know, scheduling type things, but they're more infomercial based, although I hate the infomercial as a genre.
Yeah, but it works.
But it works. But
a bullet, everyone's got a bullet blender, you know.
But the idea I was conceptualizing was that it is more of you interview the company owner or the company maybe a guy or somebody. Okay?
Sure.
And it's 30 minutes or less on some sort of topic du jour related to their business. And it doesn't have to be, you know, it's not an infomercial or 1995 gets you the DVD. It's, you know, sponsored by this company which sells the DVD at 1995. At the beginning, you talk for 30 minutes about if it's exercise DVDs, it's, you know, tell me about expand a little bit. What's the purpose of the exercise? What do you get out of it? Blah, blah, blah. And then you end it with another, 1995 ad.
I think there is enormous potential for intelligent marketization or commercialization of content online. But you have to be careful, right? Because with online, it's not sticky. It's not like television,
right.
Where there's two things that television and radio and the traditional stuff have. A, they've got a captive audience that they've already built. They've already got hundreds of thousands, if not millions of eyeballs and ears. So they can, you can do a one-time spot on those and get a bang as a company. Whereas on the internet, people can just switch over to another website. They're bored with you. It's like Netflix, you start watching a movie and 5 minutes in, you look at your wife or your friend and you're like, we'll try something else. So, and then also, so you've got to have good, your content's still got to be good. If it's too salesy, no one's going to want to listen or watch. It needs to be very informative and educational and engrossing. And I think it's heavily dependent on the business and product too. I work with a lot of lawyers, and the reason I think video blogging works so well for a lawyer is that when you hire a lawyer, all you're hiring is that person. It's their ability to go and interpret the law and argue for you and all that type of stuff. So to me, it's that connection is huge to make. For like a product and stuff, I think there's definitely potential for it. It's something that I'm scrambling to figure out and sell and package to clients. Anything to make some money off of it. No. It's not all money focused.
I know ultimately everything that I listen to and that I watch, I want to be entertained, but in the end I want to be able to make that data or that information that I've gotten pliable. I want to be able to apply it to whatever I'm trying to find out about.
Okay.
It's you can only watch Keyboard Cat so many times on YouTube, and then that has that has satisfied that immature part of your brain, and then you have to get back to the real world.
Sure.
And I was in sales too, and the personal regret that people feel when they're in front of a salesperson is that they feel that they've been sold, whether it's through monetary value or whether it's through degrading the person that you're selling to.
Sure.
There's deep psychological things that you have to be aware of, and also you have to be aware of, well, how is this going to make me look in the future?
Sure.
ABC is an industry. If they put up the suckiest infomercial at 2 in the morning, that doesn't carry on them as an image. Their news does, but not the TV shows that they show.
Sure.
Even though, CBS is the murder channel now.
Okay.
They have like CSI,
Sure. Sure.
And that is, as terrible as it is, that is the thing that sells, and it's not. To make a point on this is that people want to give value to the time that they have with somebody. Like I listen to the New York Times podcast every morning. It's the paper. I get through Audible, and I listen to that for an hour, and I get all the top things that are going on in the New York Times.
Yeah.
And I feel that that's time well spent. I also pay through Audible because I have an Audible subscription.
Right.
So,
so that's interesting, and we'll circle back to interview. It's an unconference, right? So we can talk about whatever we want. I did the Audible thing with the New York Times stuff for a while.
yeah.
And I stopped because I realized I could look at the Huffington Post for like 30 seconds and all the headlines, and I get the same level of news. So I don't know. I found that I could listen to the Audible thing, and it's about 50 minutes long.
Yeah.
So I would do 1.5 or 2x speed.
Wow.
Right.
I can't do that.
I speed it up. It sounds like a chipmunk, and it would race through the stuff. But I don't know. Like I got away from that, and I got back to listening to more of these interviews because to me, there's headlines and there's all this news going on around the world, and you can catch that. But if I'm listening to an interview and I'm listening to a particular person's take on stuff, and if the interview's done really well, like. Some of the guys that I'll listen to will talk current subjects. One, not a great example, but Joe Rogan, for some reason I've been trying to listen to him again. And he's actually had some interesting ones. He had an astronaut from Canada on recently. And it was a great interview, at least on the astronaut's end. Rogan's an interesting guy, but one thing that he brings up is the idea of, words are failing me for a second, but going out and sifting through all this mess and then finding us some interesting tidbits to learn about. New York Times has a certain method of doing that, and to me they've lost a lot of their credibility recently. But but each show that's out there has their own different kind of point they're trying to drive home or information they're trying to bring across to people, and so that's something that I think is important to really identify. Going back to that high level, what's your show always returning to? And kind of tying back to the commercialization of that, you've got, it comes back to the question of the network, right? I mean, ABC's a network, YouTube's a network, and then your own podcast can be its own network. And that network is only very valuable depending on how many people are listening to it regularly. So, we're getting way off of the interview subject here, but it's a fascinating discussion. I like talking about it for sure.
Isn't it important for the person that's interviewing you for you to like the person that's interviewing you?
No.
No? Because I think I like Frost and Nixon, because Nixon hated Frost.
Yeah.
I mean, really.
But it was great.
Thought about, after it came out, he died, Nixon was trying to find ways to murder Frost.
Sure.
Sure. But I think that the best interviews are like when the person who's being interviewed, likes the interviewer.
I think it comes and goes. Going back to WTF with Mark Maron, he's had some really explosive interviews. He had Gallagher on a couple of years ago and threw it into Gallagher's face about, I think it was racist comments that Gallagher had been making or something. And I think Gallagher got up and walked out of the show. But then he came back and they finished it and all this stuff. So, it's hard. I think as a non-professional podcaster, you might as well talk to people you like. A lot more fun. But if you find yourself getting paid, I think that the interviews where there's heads butting and ideologies kind of confronting. I mean, the Bill O'Reilly show, when he's on the Daily Channel, I'm pretty sure that's probably their highest watched shows because they're getting the left and the right watching the show.
Right.
All the interviews I've done so far, I've gotten along with everybody that I'm talking to. And that comes back to showing an interest. But you can show an interest in somebody and have a different ideological viewpoint. It's just how much do you want to have your show or your interview degrade into an argument versus a conversation, I guess.
How do you, and I don't have this, the stuff I've done a lot of times has been with friends or my spouse or whatever.
Yeah.
So there isn't the yes/no problem that an interview had.
Yes.
The interviewer comes up with this great question. So what was the influence of
pulling teeth?
And it's yes.
The pulling teeth issue. So I had an interview, and I'm not going to name any names or tell you what episode it was, but there's an interview a few back, and I got along with the people great, and I was very interested in them. I'm vegan. It was a vegan bakery. I'm like, this is going to be a home run show. And we sit down, and I hit record, and we start talking, and it just shut down. Right? They were a bakery, and I'm like, so, and just, I was trying, and so, you try and go back to some softball questions, right? And so I'm like, what's your favorite kind of cake? Well, we don't really like cake.
You're killing me.
Oh, shoot. I think I just gave away then who it was. So, but anyway, so, that comes back to this practicing interviewing and, really being able to handle that and then rebound. And so, I quickly pivoted, and I remembered there had been conversation about pie before we even started the show, and I was like, okay, what about pie? And, but it can be hard. And so that to me, so one thing I do before I hit record is I make sure that I start having a conversation with the person. Simple stuff, just like, how's your day been? What are you up to? What are your plans? And just get them kind of comfortable with talking to you. That's absolutely essential.
Before you hit them hard.
What's that?
Before you hit them hard with all the hard questions.
Well, yeah, before you, get them thinking or something, I don't know. I'm trying to, I've had shows where I've sat for an hour and talked with the person before we hit record, but we were having a good conversation. And we were talking about stuff that, you also need to be aware, there's also a trust issue, right? If the person you're talking with, is they're a little uncertain about what the point of the show is, who's going to be listening to this, all these types of things. You know, you need to establish that trust and, you know, let them know, look, I'm not going to try, you know, we're not trying to expose anything here. And one question I do ask before we start recording, so I'm just like, hey, is there anything you don't want to talk about? And for most people, they're like, what? No, I mean, we're not going to get it X-rated or anything. And I'm like, no. You know, well, you're right.
I remember, you know what? I remember being on a show many, many years ago
Okay.
that the interviewer asked me that question,
Okay.
and I told him specifically what I didn't want to talk about, and that was exactly what he brought up. So the trust issue was broken with him from the gate.
So how did you handle that?
I basically answered the questions as best I could with realizing that he was trying to nail me.
Sure. Sure. And that's...
And actually, the interview came out okay, but inside, I was not happy.
Did you say anything after the show was over?
I don't remember. It's been, you know, a long time ago and stuff.
Yeah, I mean...
I'll tell you, can I just interject here?
please, please.
Because this is kind of new for me to be back in this kind of environment.
Yeah.
I did a cable show 20 years ago back in California.
Okay.
And I'm the talent. And this is true. I'm the talent, but I was also the producer of the show.
Okay.
But if you put a mic in front of me and want me to start talking to the group, I would probably freeze up.
Sure.
So what I did is I just reversed the roles. Is I brought in my own interviewer, and which was one of my clients. And on the way to the show, I said, ask me these 4 questions. We're driving, I'm driving. And I'm telling my assistant, because she was actually my secretary, and I said, these are the 4 questions I want you to ask me. We did not rehearse. It was just because it came organically from me as knowledge.
Okay.
But these were the 4 questions I wanted her to ask, and that was the theme of the show.
Okay.
So, because I'm not, I could, you know, decide that I could do this and be the person that's doing all the interviewing, but because I'm interested in promoting myself, I just kind of like reverse those roles, and it actually worked really good.
Okay.
You know, because if I went on somebody else's show, then I'm at their mercy
Sure.
of them asking me things that I don't want to discuss. You know, or I don't, that it's awkward in that environment to discuss. It's more of a private one. I'm a therapist.
Okay.
Okay, so I didn't want to discuss anything that was going to push too many people's buttons.
Okay.
But anyway, that worked for me.
Okay.
And I'm considering doing that again, maybe through, you know, an online radio thing or something like that.
Absolutely.
But that's what I would do, is that I like the interview. I'm sorry I came in late.
No, it's an unconference.
Okay,
Guilt-free.
so,
You
but,
can come and go all you want, and you know,
but anyway, I hope
participation's
that,
encouraged.
you know, helps any of you that might be thinking of that. It's like, how do you get interviewed the way you want to be interviewed? Well, then you become the interviewer and the producer, and you bring in your own interviewer.
Sure.
But it wasn't staged, it was just spontaneous.
Okay.
And when you said that question about that the person clammed up, if you know too much about somebody, sometimes it's like you've already exhausted your conversation.
Yeah, sometimes I feel like that too, like, I know the fact about that person, but I'm not letting the audience know the fact about that
Because
person.
you already
Because-
know that
right,
person.
like,
You
and it's just
already
kind of
know.
like, woo, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, it's like you don't think to ask that
Yeah,
question because
exactly.
you already know
Right.
the answer.
Right.
Absolutely.
So if you do it more, I don't know, like more informally, like I said, with my assistant, I wouldn't tell her. It drove her crazy that I did it this way. I wouldn't tell her what the show was going to be about.
Okay.
I would think about it as I was driving. I'd say, okay, ask me these 4 questions. But I'm also an intuitive counsel person.
Okay.
So that works for me. I'm not a, what do you call those people that need everything written down?
OCD.
Yeah. What's wrong with that?
Or structure.
Nothing at all. I'm actually envious because
Okay.
I can't, I'll write it down.
Yeah, no.
And I'm like, where did I put it?
Yeah, planning is good. I can do that. But for the show,
Yeah.
it worked for me to be spontaneous.
Yeah.
Because I know my subject. But depending on what level of expertise the person is that my audience, the questions that a newbie will ask are totally different than what an advanced person will ask.
Sure.
And so I know the whole range of my subject because I've been doing it for a long, long time,
Okay.
you know? But I find that even when I talk with people that don't know what I do, is that I kind of try and scale things down. Like even coming in here, I didn't know podcast was auditory. I thought it was video. Because,
It could
you know,
be either.
huh?
You can have video podcasts.
Okay.
Podcast, really, all a podcast is it's a multimedia file delivered via RSS subscription.
I'd say I don't know what RSS is.
Really simple syndication. It was a protocol
Okay.
developed around 99, 2000.
Okay.
There's lots of people who claim to have developed it. That's
Well, some
up
kind of
for
streaming
debate.
thing, right?
So it's, and I don't want to get too off track, but it's XML. So it's a hybrid. It's higher than HTML. It's machine language.
Okay.
So it's really just for people who are never supposed to ever see the code or deal with it.
Okay.
But it allows you to go onto something like Downcast is an app I use on my iPhone.
Okay.
With that, it's a podcasting app. What I can do with that is I can subscribe to somebody's RSS feed, which is just a URL. It's just their website URL with the
That is
.rss file.
sending out some kind of
Whenever
communication.
so whenever you update it, it then broadcasts that out. And it's not really broadcast. My app will then go, it'll ping my subscription URL once a day, however you have it set, and look for new content. If there's new content, it'll download it automatically.
It's basically a fetch program. Fetch this for me, you know.
But I mean, but a RSS is a continuous kind of feed of some sort of communication.
No, I mean it's a URL that you put out there that when a program goes to it, it identifies, it tells it what to do, and so it's a pull rather than. So the fundamental difference is with television, we're getting pushed content. With RSS, we're choosing to pull the content to ourselves.
Okay.
So it'll
Yeah,
go
yeah.
crazy, and tomorrow there'll be more information on, I'm sure.
Okay.
But,
So is it kind of like, I know on my website I have a button that I call media, and in there I have my YouTube videos. Is
Yeah.
that an RSS?
It
or
might be, it depends. I mean, if you're using WordPress has a default RSS feed.
All
so-
it is a link to the YouTube video.
So
thing.
maybe not.
And RSS is like a link that you set up on, if you use Downcastor or the iTunes, or the
Podcast
iPhone
app.
podcast app. All it does is say, okay, I got this, I'm subscribed to Mark Maron's podcast. Anytime he puts new stuff on, it's gonna come down to me, and it's gonna be on
Okay.
my iPhone, ready to listen at my convenience, not,
Yeah.
Okay, so it
The
kind of
TV.
stores it,
Yeah.
so you can say, okay, I'm ready to listen to them?
Yep.
Okay.
yeah.
All right, that sounds like it's a really cool thing. I know that's
It's
why.
very cool, and the problem is that companies don't really like it because they don't have control. So
Yeah.
that's why you have YouTube. You have to have your own account on YouTube and you subscribe to channels on YouTube. That's why you have a Facebook account. And Twitter got rid of all its RSS stuff, right? Or does it still do RSS? Anyway,
They got rid of it.
RSS is pretty cool. It is pretty cool. But no, thanks for the feedback on the interviewing stuff. One of the things that I found that works for me, well, I've got like for my specific show, I'm really curious about so I have the same kind of set of questions that I kind of ask. They're not written down or anything, but it's just, so how long have you been in Phoenix? Is really one of the first things that I start to show off. And that it's one of two things. Either I moved here a few years ago or I grew up here. And then that can kind of that forks off into different questions, like, holy cow, you grew up here and you're still here?
What's wrong with you?
Well, then I have some fun with it, right? And but it's fascinating because I'm not from Phoenix, not like most people. I used to assume that, but since I've been doing this show, the majority of people I've interviewed are from Phoenix. So that's kind of changed it up, and I haven't done a lot of shows. I think I'm at 16 or something. But it's fascinating to have people, I'm fascinated in learning about Phoenix 20 years ago, 30 years ago. I moved here 13 years ago, and it's changed a lot since then, but you talk to people that have been here another 10 years, another 20 years on top of that, and it's crazy talk to me. But, so I'm very interested in that. And then, I also identify why I'm going to interview this person, So, I mentioned I'm vegan, so I've interviewed, like the vegan bakery, somebody who was putting on an event to raise awareness for a sanctuary. Another, she's kind of a friend, but she makes soaps that are organic and vegan. So, and that was a lot of fun because we sat, another thing with podcasting versus Google Hangouts is, with that one, I took my equipment and it's just the Zoom H4n and 2 microphones. I mean, that just fits in a bag. But I was able to go to her factory where she makes these soaps. I mean, it just reeked of essence oils. And reeked isn't, I mean, it's a positive term in this case. Like it was just overpowering, and it was great to kind of have that, sense to it that I think with Google Hangouts, you're not gonna, there's no smell-o-vision yet, but it'll be fun to punk people with once we have. So, in having those inherent interests, like I interviewed Cody, and he built websites as a company, and that's something that I do. So I was, fascinated with learning his story. How did he get into becoming a business owner making websites? So finding just these different things that interest you, and one thing, I'm intuitive on it too. Like I do not show up with a set list of questions. I've thought about it a little bit beforehand, but really and I don't edit my show either.
Yeah, I didn't either.
And there's multiple reasons for that. First of all, I'm really lazy. So all I want to do is just trim off the front, trim off the back. I got sophisticated to where I was putting a little music intro in after the first couple of seconds of talking, just to, I don't know, make it seem like I'm kind of professional or something like that. And that was really it. And then I make a custom graphic each time. So you need to make 2 files really. 1400 by 1400 is the main file that goes up to iTunes. And then that's what they use to kind of show your show. And then you do and then that 300 by 300 one, I think that gets blasted out too, or I put that on my page.
Who pays for the bandwidth at iTunes? I don't think I ever was.
You do.
I saw it.
Yeah,
That's
so
why
all
that's why
iTunes.
RSS.
All iTunes does is it's an RSS catcher.
Yeah.
Okay, so your graphics, your audio, your video, your RSS.
It's just a map to the treasure.
Yeah. And
They deliver the image, the 1400 by 1400 image that you upload.
Right.
They do host that.
Oh,
So
they
they're-
do host that now?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, they've always hosted that. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, you can just switch it out whenever you feel like it.
Yeah.
So that's
So,
right, you do have to put in that extra change.
so technically, there's 2 ways of doing a podcast. One is you self-host, which means you need at least, a virtual dedicated server, if you want to have any type of traffic hit your site. A shared server, the first time you have 20 people listen to your show,
It's gonna kill it.
Aren't there specialized hosting companies for that?
yeah, so the second option is you get a specific company. Libsyn is like the biggest one in the industry,
LIBSON?
That's why.
SYN.
Okay.
And so what they do,
SYN.
and their business model is really unique. When I was working in telecom, I had actually tried to pitch them CDN, and they were like, okay, can you give us bandwidth for 0.000 cents? Basically, like they're grandfathered in, they must know people at the telecom or whatever. Yeah, because their bandwidth costs are like 0, and so all they do is they charge for storage space. And so the problem with that is archiving. If you want to archive your shows with them, it gets expensive. But there's no limitations to bandwidth, so you can distribute your show to millions of people, and all you're paying for is the storage of your files.
So you can't like put it on like a regular kind of website hosting.
Yeah, you can. You can't, not on a shared server. So like GoDaddy, $5.99 a month hosting.
No, I use Host Monster,
How much you pay a month?
about 7.
Yeah, so that's a shared server. So
Yeah.
there's a server that's probably got, in HostGator's case, they're not
HostGator's.
they're not as bad as GoDaddy, so they're probably on like 3,000 other websites on that same server as you. But that means that you're sharing all the resources of a box. So if you move up if you want to self-host, you probably want to spend, a virtual dedicated server starts, I don't know, there's some places doing it for $30 a month,
Yeah,
up to like $60 a month.
okay. Years ago, there was a company that I used that was, I think it was called Carry. It was-
hosting companies are a dime a dozen.
Yeah, but it was,
That's why Libsyn's cool, because it's cheap, it's made for podcasting,
that's what I'm looking for.
and
But there's no archive, just
But,
be aware,
yeah.
unless you
So
start
you
paying
can
a
only
lot
do
more.
one, what do you
I
do
think
with
they
your
give you,
archive?
for the cheapest program, which is $5 a month,
Yeah, $5.
they give you 20 megabytes of storage,
Oh, that's
so
not very much.
if you have an hour-long show, you
Yeah.
can probably have one or two at a time.
So then where do you archive your stuff? Or do you go someplace else?
You can keep it, then you've got to like start figuring different stuff out, so just be aware of that. Libsyn's great, but if you want to have all your shows up there, you're going to be spending a decent amount of money.
So you do an audio interviewing kind of show, is that what you do?
Yeah, I mix it up now. I'm starting to do more Google Hangouts as well, just because it's so much, I put on a nice looking shirt and comb my hair over, put up a backdrop or something and turn on some lights in my office, and then I can do an interview through my computer like that.
Oh, okay.
It's pretty sweet.
It's
But
kind of like Skype?
it's like Skype and Citrix. Google Hangouts is going to take over the globe.
Okay,
Yeah, it's a free web conferencing service,
okay.
and it's better than most web conferencing stuff that you have to pay for. So, and it automatically records it and broadcasts it on YouTube after you're done.
This may sound like a really dumb question, but I have been wanting to do teleclasses for a very long time.
Okay.
And, there's a lot of free, and so I finally did all this research, this was a couple of years ago, I did all this research to find the right company that also had the recording quality. And so what I was gonna do was do telephone conferencing classes.
Yeah.
Could be an interview, okay, you could do anything on the phone.
Yeah.
And they record it free.
Sure.
And then use that as, then create the website to have, your destination content.
So Google Hangouts is going to be HD quality video, which means
Okay.
the audio is well beyond what a
Okay.
telephone does.
Okay,
So the only issue is you can't do a pay-per-view type setup with Google Hangouts at this time.
okay, so you can't monetize that.
You can monetize it by showing ads on it,
Okay.
and you get a penny per
But
million
so
visitors.
going back to the conferencing thing, is that like old school? Am I thinking too?
No,
Or is
people are doing teleconferencing and video conferences have now become the free content that you give
it-
in
okay.
order to sell your services or a bigger product and things like that. Companies are now using Google Hangouts because the only cost to it is your time to set these things up and do them. But Google is giving you this a great tool at no charge.
That's a higher level than the conference call stuff. Okay.
You can have up to 9 guests in a video chat in Google Hangouts. So each of you, your images are all showing up when you're talking, and then that can be broadcast live to as many people as on the internet. Until
Okay.
Google throttles you, but
Okay.
they've got a lot of
Okay, so that's the way to go. I knew it.
If you're selling a service or product, I would probably tell you if you're just starting out, and Evo Terra, I'm stealing from his presentation just before this one, where he was talking about Google Hangouts. If you're starting out, you might as well just go use Google Hangouts.
Okay.
If you've got an established podcast network, you've spent a lot of time and effort establishing that, keep going with that. But,
I have plenty of websites.
okay.
And I've got a blog, all of that, but I have done no social media. And Facebook, every time I get Facebook, I don't know if it stinks or what it is about Facebook, it's just, I don't want to go there. I can't go there.
You don't have
I
to.
got lost coming here because they kept giving all the Facebook, and I couldn't do that. Because I don't have a Facebook account.
Okay.
So it's like I had to do it old school, and I
You should get a Facebook account. It doesn't cost anything.
Yeah, I know, but I don't like it.
It doesn't matter if you like it or not. Your customers are on there. 300 million.
Well, yeah, but I'm thinking if
Or a billion
Google,
people.
see, Google Plus, I've had the feeling about Google Plus that it's the place to go to.
Sure.
I just haven't gotten around to doing it.
Yeah.
So if I have to do I have to do both? Can I just make the choice of just do Google Plus and leave Facebook over
Yeah,
there until they finally
it comes
get
down to focusing your attention.
Yeah,
Focus your attention. You'll be fine if you just focus on Google Plus.
Okay.
There are a lot of people on there, and I mean, Google's the busiest website in the world, and it forced Google Plus into it. I mean, if you set up your authorship on your website, right, your picture is now showing up in Google organic results. That it has prompted all marketers and social media people in the world to get a Google Plus account for all their
Okay.
clients, so.
Okay,
It's happening.
well, so, you know, somebody just said in the other room that they got new friends because they couldn't convince their Facebook friends to switch over to Google Plus, and the guy that was giving the presentation.
Evo.
Yeah, he just said, well, you know, I bet the cooler people are over on Google Plus.
Well, yeah, Google, Evo, I think he's getting paid, I don't know. 'Cause he became the Google Plus maven. I mean, he's pretty well known for having switched to that team and going for it. But, you know, he points out, he's like, I'm not going to convince Facebook people to go to Google Plus. You know, they're slowly going over there, but I mean, I don't even use Google Plus that much because all my friends are on Facebook. So for that stuff, I still go to Facebook, but I use Google Plus for all my work stuff because that's showing up in Google and YouTube, which is where everybody goes to spend money. So from a business side, Google Plus is a no-brainer. But it's still hokey to me.
Okay, because it has the advertising, monetizing aspect of it.
No, I mean, the number one way that people find a business in today's world
Is in Google.
is through Google.
Right,
So the more content you're putting onto Google, the better chance you're gonna get someone
Okay.
finding you.
yeah, okay,
It's
so I
law of
can,
averages.
it's okay, I can ignore Facebook.
Sure.
At my own risk.
Just be aware that it's there.
Yeah.
If you wanna talk to, your kids or grandkids,
Don't have any of those.
okay, then you're fine.
Yeah. See, I don't need it. Besides that, it's like, I don't know, I have, this thing about that everything about your whole life is like spread out all over Facebook.
You already have it all anyway.
Yeah, don't worry,
Yeah.
Google's been sucking it up.
Google's been watching you for a long time now.
Yeah, but even with my meetup group, I don't even give my real name because it's like, because it shows up in Google. It's like it's nobody's business what my weekend interests are.
And you don't have to share it.
Yeah, but you can't really shut it down too much. I mean, you could put it on private, but the only way I figured out how to do it was not to put any information in there.
Sure, but all someone has to do is pay Facebook or Google, and they'll get all the information they got on you. So.
You don't actually have any rights.
And then it really is good.
No.
I got one sort of quick question to bring it back to interviewing and podcasting. How important do you feel it is, or maybe some of the people with experience in podcasting? You sort of alluded to it where you've got a set sort of list of questions. I mean, you don't go in with a sheet printed out, but you have you go down the same path, so to speak, with each interviewee.
Yeah.
How important is it to have a theme, if you will, that you kind of stick to? And my thought there is, I mean, there's a shelf life to certain ideas that you could base sort of a show around, if you will. And it seems like, some podcasts will go strong and then they're just gone all of a sudden, like they just ran out of, gas or whatever it was. But how important is it to really stick to the theme that you've set out? And if I can ask you, what is the theme of your podcast?
So Desert Standard, the theme on that podcast is finding interesting stuff happening in the Phoenix and Arizona area, and then kind of getting that out to people.
Well, that's cool, because that's ambiguous enough that you can talk about almost anything.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
But it's also so ambiguous, it's like, what am I even doing?
Yeah,
this
right.
for?
Well, not
Now
to
we get
bring that
existential.
up,
No, and so,
but I guess then the question, is it to have a more focused theme? I guess it really depends on what the hell you're talking about in your audience, really.
And
That's
why
probably
you're
what it all
doing
comes down
well,
to.
yeah, it depends on your focus and interest. It's individual to everybody, and what I encourage you to do. So I got into using mind maps recently. I don't know if you tried these out. What's that?
Toggle.it.
I'm using MindNode. So MindNode's got an iOS version and a desktop Mac version, and so they use iCloud and they synchronize, so it's really nice for that. But I can just pull up my iPhone and start just mapping out words and ideas on stuff, and then you can export that as a list into other programs and kind of build things out. But really, it's important. You've got to kind of figure out an overall theme of your show.
Right.
And it can be, like Desert Standard is really broad. And I try and always, sometimes I did a couple shows that were kind of technology focused, and I was like, I need to switch this up. and I did ones that talked about, you know, sustainability. But always, what it always comes back to is it's somebody who lives in Phoenix who's doing something. So, okay.
And what is your motivation for doing it?
You know, I like meeting new people. I mean, it's sales in general, so it's, you know, just meeting different people and learning more about what's going on.
So it's what people used to do in the old days was to start a club about their interest. And then, and if you're interested in all of these different things, like I said, you get to meet all these different people, get feedback, because they all want to come talk to you, because you're, okay.
So, you know, and the cost of entry to doing this stuff now is so low. It's like,
But
it's
is it also
just
tied in
experimenting.
though with your business? Or is
You know,
this just a
at this point,
recreational
I've
thing?
kept it separate in terms of the show. I don't promote my business on the show.
Okay.
But I just don't feel
What
that
is
that's-
your business?
I do online marketing.
Okay.
Hey, no worries, yeah. And what, should you have a card or?
I don't have a card. I'm Roger Media on Twitter. And I pay attention to that every once in a while.
What's your company, your Desert
If you do a search for Desert Standard, my website will come up, as well as I have a Google Plus page for it. And then and I think all of it's linked off to Desert Standard too, to all my different stuff. So
Very
yeah,
intriguing, so yeah, I'll definitely look that, appreciate it.
cool, Jason. Thanks. Good to meet you.
Yep.
Cool. Hey, that wasn't so bad. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
So are we done?
We're done. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm Roger.
I'm Alexandria.
Is that your real name?
Yeah. Yeah, check the court records, they changed it for me.
Oh, no, that's fine. They
Thanks.
disconnected the,
What was it?
Oh.